And welcome into another edition of Gamecock Central Radio Podcast. I'm Wes Mitchell, alongside Chris Clark, talking Gamecocks football fall preseason practice. Chris, as we got sort of our first true look at this team. I know we get the 15 minutes various times as far as media goes for some of the practices, but first true look at this team as far as a full practice goes there at Williams-Brice Stadium. Ended up being a beautiful night, great weather. Thought it was well handled. Had maybe, a couple thousand people out there. So it was a good night, good opportunity for us to get out there and see these guys. And Chris, I think, obviously, not always easy to take a lot from, just one practice, an open practice. But I thought one thing that always has stood out to me watching these Muschamp practices, dude, has just been the pace in which everything sort of has to operate. There's very little standing around. I made the comment while we were watching that, you have to be in phenomenal shape just to make it through one of these practices. So, obviously every coaching staff has their different structures, but I think that's one thing that's kind of interesting to me is after watching just multiple years of Spurrier practices is even the structure of these Muschamp practices is different. It seemed like in a Spurrier practice, you sort of start with one-on-ones, and then you build up to 7-on-7 pass scale, then you move on to 11-on-11, whereas Muschamp's practices, it's kind of like there's position drills, then you mix in some 11-on-11. Then there's some special teams, then you go back to 11-on-11. There's some cock drill thrown in there, which is their Oklahoma drill, and then it's back to 11-on-11. So it seems like the focus of all these Muschamp practices is ultimately sort of true football, and then they mix in all the other drills sort of throughout, I feel like.
Yeah, it's almost disorienting, and from what we know about Coach Muschamp, I think that's probably by design. Like you said, I know you turned to me after practice last night, man, said, God, you got to be in shape, to go through one of these practices, even just one of them. And so, camp is a tough deal for these players. It's a deal where they're tired, at the end of it. And then, they do get some time off, and then they get to a situation where they're preparing for NC State or whatever opponent they've got coming up. They'll be preparing week to week, but it is all over the place. And, the reason that they structure it that way is just to, I've heard multiple people say it, whether it's Jeff Dillman, I think Muschamp said it, some players, they say that, if you practice that hard and you prepare that hard, it makes the games easy. Now, fans don't need to, take that and run with it and say, okay, well, they should win every game because they, if it's supposed to be that easy. It just means that, you're prepared for the game. You're prepared for that grind of a football game. If you're able to go through practices that are that intense. So, when you're running from station to station, when you're jumping from an 11-on-11 period where they've piped in crowd noise and it's probably louder than an actual stadium, with 80,000 people in there, and you jump from that to, okay, now you got to go to a positional drill and focus. It really sort of, I think helps the players focus. I think it helps them adopt that mentality where they're really having to strain, mentally and physically. And it sort of, I think, can have the effect of hardening them up and getting them sort of tougher for what they're going to face throughout the season.
I thought, Chris, that other than that, just even the tempo in which they're running plays, I know tempo is something this team can do, but I don't foresee this being a tempo offense, so to speak, and what you think of as like hurry up, no huddle, stuff like that. But it feels to me like tempo is still very much a part of these practices just because it's really the only true way to get your defense prepared for something like that, and South Carolina will face a lot of tempo teams this year, obviously. And then B, that just from an efficiency standpoint allows you to get more reps. So if the more reps you get, the more opportunities you get, and that allows you to get more out of that sort of 2+ hour window of time that you got there. So I always thought that was interesting, just how much tempo they use in practice, whereas in the games this isn't necessarily based on everything I've been told, going to be like a hurry up sort of, Oregon, Auburn, those guys that you think of like the hurry up, no huddle offense based attacks and stuff like that. But sort of in that same light, I will say that these skill guys that we've sort of been talking up, mostly based on what we've been hearing more than what we've been able to actually see with our own eyes. Obviously everybody knows about Deebo Samuel, knows about Brian Edwards, knows about Hayden Hurst, but you go to that next level of guys behind them, Chris, and I think those guys, to me, absolutely just lived up to what I expected. We've been hearing all these good things about them, and then you actually see them out there with your own eyes. They looked about what I thought they would look like, maybe even a little bit better in some aspects.
Yeah, I think a little bit better. I was thinking about that last night, where I really liked all three of the guys that they signed in 2017, of course, being, Ortre Smith, Shi Smith, Chad Terrell out of Georgia, and had high expectations for them. That said, I didn't know that Shi Smith would be a guy who's in line to start in the slot against NC State when they go three wide. And Ortre Smith really had a couple head-turning catches in the scrimmage type situations last night. And Chad Terrell's been very solid as well, and has come on towards the end of camp to where he could potentially be a guy to help out too. Took some second team reps last night along with Ortre Smith, and so I think those guys have lived up to expectations and more. Brian McClendon's obviously done a good job not only recruiting them and getting them to South Carolina, but in helping develop them as well. Ortre's been on campus since spring, and the other two enrolled during the summer, and that's a quick learning curve, but they're in position to help some. And the interesting thing is that each of them have a different skill set. It's not like South Carolina signed two or three of the same guy. They're all actually really different players and all bring something different to the table, but they have a lot of those attributes that McClendon talks about. And that is, the ability to make contested catches, the ability to get open. And some guys are going to be different. Shi is more of the speed downfield threat guy, but Ortre Smith can get vertical. Chad Terrell does a really good job, tracking the ball downfield. He's a savvy player. So they all have something different that they bring to the field, and I think that's what makes them all intriguing guys as freshmen.
Yeah, I thought Ortre, and it's something else I've heard, but we saw it play out. I thought Ortre Smith has sort of got to that point to where he looks very, very comfortable using his body to sort of shield off defenders and go make sort of plays that you have to have really good ball skills and really good concentration to make. And, that's something that I've heard McClendon talk about as well, is that you want a guy who is open even when he's covered. And that's, basically where your quarterback has that not only capability but trust to be able to throw the football. Even if there's not much separation, you trust that your guy's going to go get it. And there was one play where Ortre Smith went down and sort of plucked one off the ground, and there was another play that was kind of, I guess you'd maybe call it a back shoulder type throw down the sideline that, I think your comment was he caught that, which, I think that, when you start seeing these guys make plays like that, to me, that's a sure sign they're starting to get comfortable. And I'm curious, Chris, to see how this rotation plays out. Like, we know who those main guys are going to be. Shi Smith's already sort of pushed his way into that slot spot, which has obviously been that window was a little bit more open with Randricus Davis still dealing with injuries. He's still a guy that's kind of the forgotten guy right now. But if he can get healthy, Randricus Davis gives you another option in there as the year goes on. This group, I think, has the capability to have some depth as the season goes on. Then you start talking about getting the tight ends in the mix. Casey Crosby's always sort of an undervalued guy, I think. Did good things last year in the slot as we get to tight ends. And, Kill Pollard showed us a lot in the spring. And man, I know you and I were both sitting there looking at Evan Henson going, okay, this guy, I think your comment was, that's the fifth string tight end right there. And, you're sitting here watching Evan Henson and you're like, any other time we're probably talking about Evan Henson as being, this is the guy that's going to break out as a redshirt freshman. just based on athletic ability. And I'm watching this guy burst for his size, just the explosiveness, and it's crazy. It's off the charts, and I think that Evan Henson's a guy that not only has a bright future, but those are the type guys that I think probably help your special teams a lot when you talk about special teams coverage and guys that can run and get down there. Played some defense in high school, so he's comfortable doing some stuff like that. I think those guys sort of not only provide depth on offense, Chris, but they help you sort of upgrade your entire team speed and athleticism, I think.
Yeah, and Muschamp pegged, Evan Henson as a guy who was going to help them out on special teams. And, when he was asked about him at one point this preseason, he said, we'll see what happens with the tight end rotation. And that's the thing. I mean, you got Hurst and Crosby and two established guys, and then Jacob August played plenty last year and could play this year. And, then you got Pollard and Henson and Kyle Markway coming back too. And you're right. The tight end, those are your body types who, guys who are big like that and have the capability to be physical and can run are really types that can help you on special teams. So I think we'll see Henson and Markway and Pollard, some of those guys who maybe aren't pulling down as many snaps as, the number one or number two tight end in this offense could do that. But yeah, Henson definitely, he flashed last night. Keel Pollard flashed. I thought both those guys are pass catching threats. Henson, a couple plays that stood out, is the one where we talked about him afterwards where he just sort of burst down the sideline. Who is that? And another one where he just went right up the seam and plucked the ball out of the air that looked like it was overthrown by a couple yards, and he was just able to pluck it out of the air. So, just intriguing physical tools, and I think he's someone to sort of not forget about for this season because he'll still be in there to a degree. But he's someone that you can, I think, file away for the future for sure.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, that just like you said with the receiver group of freshmen, how they're different different type players, different skill sets. To me, that's the interesting thing about this tight end group is that you actually kind of have guys that have multiple skill sets, maybe within a game based on a matchup or something you like versus an opponent or something you don't like versus an opponent as far as a matchup goes. You maybe can use those guys in different ways. And it's kind of interesting that you even have, I feel like Hayden Hurst kind of has a natural backup from a skill set standpoint. It's sort of Evan Henson. He's like the taller, athletic guy. And I think Casey Crosby is very, very similar to Keel Pollard. And then, you have two of your more maybe blocking-oriented tight ends, Jacob August and Kyle Markway, who I think will probably be one of those guys that's never – Markway's probably a guy that's never mentioned by the fans, but maybe has a place on this team in certain downs and distances, maybe your third and shorts, fourth and shorts. It's the guy who's a hard-nosed kid, good blocker. I think there's a place for that on every team, especially when Will Muschamp is your coach and you're preaching physicality. He's going to find a spot to get those guys on the field, even if it's just very specific situations. I think talking special teams, though, is a perfect segue, Chris, as we sort of talk some other special team spots. I thought at the end of practice was interesting how they handled the place kicking. You had Coleman Hutzler, the special teams coordinator. He's out there. He's got a water bottle just, shooting water everywhere. He's yelling. He's jumping around. The entire team is surrounding Alex Wozniak and Parker White, who are sort of battling for that kicker job. And they're basically, and it's not a surprise, but it was interesting to see it play out. They're doing everything they can to put some pressure on these guys, Chris, because neither Wozniak nor White have kicked in front of 70, 80,000 people. So they're doing all they can, and I think it's kind of a thing of you may not be able to put 70,000 eyeballs on them, but you can sure put some peer pressure on them by their entire team sort of surrounding them after practice. So I think that's something that as these next week and a half, sort of plays out, that is going to be something to watch is who ultimately takes that first kick. And that may be a job, Chris, that there's a winner, but depending on how they perform, obviously, we could see both Wozniak and White, I think, in the game at various times this season.
Yeah, because White could factor in as a kickoff guy too. Even if he didn't win the place kicking job. I mean, because he's got a strong leg, he's a big guy. That's the thing is with all these kickers and the punter, Joseph Charlton, now Michael Allman, is still in the mix too, but we've heard more and seen more from Charlton lately. All those guys have the leg. I mean, there's not much doubt in terms of the leg strength. We've seen Wozniak and Parker White hit long field goals. We've heard about them hitting long field goals, and we've seen Charlton and his ability to boom some punts when he gets a hold of one. But the two main concerns would be that's consistency. We've still seen and heard of some inconsistencies of that. And then, as you pointed out, the inexperience factor. I mean, none of these guys have done it in a game situation, and especially they haven't done it. It's more magnified by the fact that even if they had done it, have they done it in a pressure-packed on-the-road situation? So the answer to all of it's no. So I think even if they exited preseason and they were, left camp and they're getting ready for NC State, and Parker White and Wozniak and Charlton are just hitting everything, booming punts, they're almost perfect from everywhere on the field in terms of kicks, they would still be worried, the coaching staff, because they say, okay, that's great, but can they do it, when it matters? And so those are some things that I think are concerning. If there's some good news to be had, it's that they're all capable. You look at them and you don't see just a complete void to where there's nobody on the roster that's even capable of doing it. They don't have anybody with a leg that can punt it far and high and put some pressure on the other team to catch it. They don't have anybody who can hit a field goal from 50. No, they've got those things, but the question is just, can they do it in game situations?
Yeah, and I think, we were watching, I think it was Parker White, when they were kicking from about 30-something yards, and we just looked at each other and were like, dang, that ball was high. So I think a lot of times you see kickers that have accuracy from short distance, and it's sort of that low line drive at times, which can be susceptible to being blocked and stuff like that. So, like you said, not really the case or a worry with these guys. They both, they all have big legs, so it's just going to be about pressure and execution, when it really matters. So that'll be something I think we have to watch throughout the year, and I'll be curious to see how it affects Muschamp's decision making too. Last year he was very, very confident, even in fourth and short situations, in trotting Elliott Fry out there because he wanted to get the near guaranteed 3 points. I think this year maybe that plays into that decision making as well. So that'll be just another storyline to watch. Punt return, that's an open job as well. I guess on Monday night we saw Chris Lamons, Rashad Fenton, and Shi Smith out there. Lamons had a good finish in that category last season. Had a big return in the bowl game. But Chris, I kind of look at the secondary depth and the concerns there, especially with the injuries piling up. I don't think you want to lose Chris Lamons on punt return, but I also don't, or Rashad Fenton for that matter. But hey, at the same time, you're talking about a Shi Smith or Jamias Williams putting a freshman out there game one. I personally tend to think maybe you put Lamons out there to start the year, but then maybe you ease in a Shi Smith. That's just my personal feeling. My prediction would be maybe Lamons is out there first, but then Shi ultimately takes over that job at some point. But, that's another position that could go any number of ways, I guess.
I'm sure would love if Shi Smith could win it or someone other than Lamons and Fenton, but that is a key. A lot of people say, well, why trot a starter out there? Why play starters on special teams? Well, what's important? And for a team that doesn't have a lot of depth like South Carolina, or maybe a lot of guys that are proven or they feel good about who can return punts or kicks, I mean, you still got to do it. It's still a necessary play in football, and it's a necessary one to be good at. We saw South Carolina go through some punt return struggles last season as far as, just trying to find a guy who could do it, having some decisions that weren't ideal, having some ball security issues. So those are the types of things when you get in close games that they can win or lose you a game. And so I think it's them, trying to put the best guy out there. But I'm with you. I mean, I think if you can get Shy into some situations, say you can get up on a team or two and you're not in a close fourth quarter game and you say, we feel good enough to trot Shy out there and let him try it. It'd be tough to stick him out there in game one, first punt, and have him go do it. Is it possible? I suppose so. But it gives you a little bit more consternation as a coach. You always like to sort of err on the side of experience, but that secondary depth is certainly something that they're going to have to monitor.
Yeah, and I'm one of these guys who normally, like, I don't buy that argument at all about why would you put a starter on special teams. I think when it's a starter, potentially like a Shi Smith or even a Deebo Samuel who returned some kicks and punts last year, and Deebo may have the job as kickoff returner this year. I think when you're talking about offensive skill guys, you spend your entire week game planning offensively to put the football in these guys' hands. So, it's like another opportunity. It's a free opportunity most of the times to get the ball in Deebo or Shi Smith or whoever's hands. So, I think with Lamons or Fenton, you're talking about defensive guys who can be dynamic with the ball in their hands, but that you're so thin over there. I think that crosses your mind. But special teams is so important. Like it gets overlooked, I think, sometimes by fans, but it's so important. Like you got an opportunity to get the ball in a playmaker's hands, possibly in space. The entire point of the spread offense is to get the ball to your playmakers in space. So, to me, that's an advantage, is to be able to put those guys back there. So I think, like you said, ultimately, do you want to put Shi Smith out there game one? Do you want the first thing that Shi Smith does in a Gamecock uniform to be catching a punt at Bank of America Stadium? Probably not. That's tough. But do you ultimately want to maybe get the football in that guy's hands? I think so. So that'll be another position to watch. All right, let's talk, I guess, Chris, a little defense. We haven't really hit much of it. Some guys that stood out to you, some guys that stood out to me. I'll give one veteran and one newcomer. Veteran would be Bryson Allen Williams, who I think we've been hearing a lot about. I've heard he's had a really good camp. You sort of got to at least see how they're going to use him. I think he's going to be coming off the edge a lot, particularly when they're in nickel. That was sort of a question I had, was how exactly is he going to be used. It seemed like when they were in nickel, he's more of a buck, extra rusher type. When they're in the 4-3, sort of traditional against, two back or two tight ends, then he's more of that Sam backer where you've got, him on the field, obviously with Sky Moore and T.J. Brunson. So I'll go with him as the veteran. Newcomer on defense, and I know you agreed because we talked about him. But Aaron Sterling, this is a guy that I don't know, Chris, necessarily how ready he is to hold up against the run on a play-by-play basis. He's not like your traditionally shaped defensive end, but this guy just has a knack for getting to the passer. This guy had 6 sacks in a game one time in high school. Like I don't care what level you're playing at. You get 6 sacks in one freaking football game. Like that's like you're doing some good things. You're doing something right. So the need for pass rush, I say third and long, third and passing situations. Aaron Sterling's going to help this football team a lot. So there's my 2 guys, Chris. What maybe 2 guys otherwise from those 2 caught your eye on Monday night?
Yeah, I'd actually go ahead and pick two veterans, 2 returners. Taylor Stallworth was one for me, and You probably recall that Lance Thompson, the defensive line coach, singled him out this preseason and said that was really their one proven bona fide SEC, really good SEC football player up front. And that's alarming, but it's also, I think, reality. And that doesn't take anything away from Taylor. He is a good player. He's strong. He's more in shape than he was last season. Not to say he was out of shape last season, but he's reshaped his body. He's dropped some weight, and he's gotten himself into better conditioning to where I think he'll be able to, potentially play more snaps this year if needed. He's a really strong guy. Watching him in their one-on-one blocking drills, really good at using his hands, defeating blocks, playing with really good leverage because he's a shorter guy, so it's naturally easy for him to do that. The other guy that stood out to me was Rashad Fenton. He had really, really good coverage in the scrimmage situations, I thought, last night, whether it's down by the red zone or, one-on-one situations or when they went full team. He had a couple of pass breakups on balls that were intended for Deebo Samuel. As we know, Deebo, really good, even though he's not a 6'4", 6'5" receiver, really good with the ball in the air, really good at tracking it, making tough catches, contested. And I thought Fenton stuck right with him. He can really run, and did a good job of knocking it away. It actually brought to mind, there was that Athlon article with the SEC anonymous coaches recently, and Rashad Fenton was one that they singled out. And one of the coaches called him a millionaire walking if he can put it together. And I think you can sort of see why based on some of the athletic traits that he's flashed so far. But with him being out at corner this year as opposed to a nickel, I think he'll have more of an opportunity to go try to make some one-on-one plays and be called on to blanket some really good receivers. So he stood out last night as well, I thought.
Yeah, and in that same light, I think another thing from maybe the not-so-positive side that stood out to me with the secondary is that those injuries, and not that it really should be a surprise by any means, but it just sort of struck me when we were watching that second team, defensive backfield out there. The injuries to obviously Jalen Dickerson, who's out for the year at safety. Stephen Montague has been banged up. Taven Jackson's banged up right now. Taven, a guy I think is going to play a lot as a true freshman if he can get healthy. Montague, obviously, sort of your Swiss Army knife. He can play any position in the secondary. The absence of those two guys sort of just was glaring to me. You had a walk-on at safety and Javon Charleston, who was out there with the second team. Caleb Chalmers and Corey Banks at cornerback, and Banks, the guy still transitioning. I think he's a good athlete. I think he's a great athlete, but still transitioning from wide receiver to cornerback. So, I think very, very key heading forward for them to try to get, a Taven Jackson, to try to get, a Stephen Montague back healthy. And the defense as a whole, man, I think we all know this. There wasn't much depth coming in, but I think some of those positions you start to feel a little bit better. I think Sherrod Green at linebacker, Eldridge Thompson at linebacker, and the fact that Bryson Allen Williams can sort of do so many things and you can use him in different spots. That I feel a little bit better probably about their depth at linebacker than I did coming in. Defensive line sort of is what it is, but I think that secondary depth is something that's being tested, and you don't want it to be tested already. Because you know you're going to get tested during the season. So here we are, less than 2 weeks till kickoff, and that's sort of a bit of a concern to me because I think they're starting, starting five, they're in pretty solid shape.
Yeah, I mean, depth a huge concern. And I think you're right. You make a good point about the linebackers that they got a couple guys there as backups that they could put in a game and feel good about. But the second part about it is they haven't done it. They haven't played yet, haven't taken a snap ever. I think the feeling better about it goes back to the fact that those guys, I think, sort of are what they thought they could be during recruiting, meaning that, Will Muschamp's talked about it a lot. He says sometimes you sign a guy and you think he's going to make X contribution and he's not ready, or you get sort of a surprise in a guy. I think they've been a little bit surprised by Aaron Sterling. I mean, they signed him. They really liked him, thought he'd be a good player. I think they've been a little bit surprised by how ready he's looked. But Eldridge, it took him a little bit longer, I think, just to sort of adjust. But he's done a good job. He's very athletic. Sherrod Greene looks like a smart, instinctual football player who can move. And so aside from the inexperience, I think athletically they can feel okay about those guys. Still wouldn't be ideal to play them a ton just because they're newcomers, but they have some options there. And if they can get healthy in the secondary, I think athletically they'll have more options there than last season too, but that health is a key. And then, of course, just the defensive line. I mean, they have to show some improvement playing the run and rushing the passer, and maybe they can make some strides, albeit however marginal it may be, in those categories.
I guess that about does it on defense for now. I'm trying to think of what we haven't hit from the scrimmage. We haven't really talked offensive line much, Chris. Again, seems like, I think we said this last podcast, man. Seems like for the most part, they're still experimenting. They still want guys to earn positions, but for the most part, I think Eric Wolford has a decent idea of who's going to play each spot, sort of still ironing out who would go in if a certain guy went down. We had reported that DJ Park would sort of be the next man up at a number of positions, and I think we saw that sort of play out on Monday night because Park played pretty much, I think, multiple guard and tackle spots. He even got in there at left tackle, which is something we didn't expect. But yeah, I think that Malik Young, Dennis Daly left tackle sort of competition is still ongoing, even though it was mentioned that Malik Young would probably be the starter. I think Daly's still making a push there. He's done some good things there. But to me, if I'm going to sum up the offensive line at this point, it's sort of like nothing we saw Monday, nothing we're going to hear, nothing that's going to be said is really going to mean a whole lot. To me, it's just going to be about that first test, on the field, NC State. What improvements can we notice from last year? What sort of impact has Wolford been able to make in a small period of time? Because I mean, we've talked about it multiple times, man. They're going to have a real test to start the year. So the practice stuff against the Carolina defensive line, that also is a question mark. Just don't know how much you can take from that at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that and that's the part that's been sort of difficult even in our coverage, I'll admit, is that, that's what fans want to know about. They want to, okay, D-line and O-line, and we can tell them about some individual progress and, how we think things are look, what we've heard, moves, things like that. But it's still tough because they're still going against each other. And so you made a great point that both units still have significant questions. And so it becomes a situation where you're like, well, is one still about the same and one's gotten better? Are they both not good? Are they both improved? It's just tough to gauge. And so I think like you said, we'll have a much better answer after the NC State game on that. I think there are some reasons to think that things will be better to some degree. Number one, I mean, it just wasn't. No part of it was good last season. I mean, what was it? 41 sacks. Now, some of them were on the quarterback. They had so much inexperience. They had injuries. Two guys were out. Corey Helms was hurt. Alan Knott was weaker because he couldn't lift. We discussed all those things. So none of those things are in place. As of now, they're healthy. They're stronger. They're moving around a little better. So there have been some positive things, but the experience around them's better. But it's still tough to project. Okay, how much better can they be? I don't think anybody expects to go from a sort of worst to first situation, so to speak. But I think it's
right.
It's fair to expect some improvement. And so that's just the question: is how much better can they look? And I think they'll build some things into their offensive play calling to try to mask any deficiencies they feel like they have. But for me, left tackle is still that biggest question. And I tell you, for a position that Wolford said that he thinks Malik Young is going to start, Dennis Daly's still taking an awful lot of first-team reps there.
Yeah. We'll see how that plays out. I think that's still worth tracking, I think, so to speak. All right, cool. So less than 2 weeks till game time. South Carolina, I think, will sort of officially start working on NC State midweek this week. So that'll be interesting to see the attention turn to that. Next practice availability will be Friday, then a availability on Saturday as well, and we will have complete coverage of that on GamecockCentral.com. And then, hey, it'll be game week, so it'll be here before we know it. Chris, you got any closing thoughts, man? I guess we can wrap this sucker up again.
Yeah, I'm just, and I think we talked about this. This is one of the previous ones. I'm ready to start previewing game coverage. I mean, ready to start diving into some of these matchups now that camp's really over, and try to see how South Carolina is going to match up. Still a lot of unknowns going into this game, both for NC State and South Carolina. So I think it makes it a really, really intriguing matchup. And I don't think there were any gigantic surprises that we were able to gather from preseason camp, which not entirely unsurprising in itself. But I think it was an interesting camp, and we were able to glean some things from it. But I'm ready to sort of turn the page and start checking out our game coverage for the NC State opener.
It'll be fun. I can promise you that. South Carolina has Wednesday off from practice, completely off their feet, and then they actually start school again, start the semester on Thursday, and then head into practice on Friday and Saturday, which we'll have coverage from. Like I said, want to remind everyone out there to subscribe to us on iTunes, to obviously check us out on Gamecock Central for all of your Gamecock Central coverage, and you can try that for free right now with the promo code FREEUT, that's capital FREEUT, and get complete premium membership and coverage and all that good stuff from now until the Tennessee game, absolutely free. If you cancel between now and then, you will not be charged at all. Free trial. So check that out with the promo code FREEUT. For Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. This has been the latest edition of the Gamecock Central podcast. We'll talk to you next time.